On. Okay. Welcome to Wednesday night at Safe Harbor. I'm Billy Storms, and I get to be the pastor of this group most weekends until they fire me. So I'm just glad that you're joining us. We have some really heart-tugging things that our church family is experiencing right now. One of our newest church members, John Durr, died Monday. Services are Tuesday at 10:30 here, and there's a sign-up sheet over here. We want to provide a lunch for the family after the services at 10:30. Be about 11:30 or something. Sandwiches, finger food, and stuff that way. And it'll be here. So it'll be Tuesday at 10:30 here at the church. And so I spent time with Jan and two of her daughters. Was over there Tuesday and visited yesterday. And we're getting the service all planned out, and he's being cremated, but we're going to have the services here, and we'll have an order of service and everything else. So just pray for the Durr family, and he came home from the hospital. The doctor told him that he would be on permanent dialysis, and his body was just falling apart, and he just didn't make it. He just I think he really, just was just at his wit's end, and so we just pray for the family, and he was very weak. When I saw him in the hospital a couple of times, he was beautifully responsive and hopeful, but he knew all the time he was a member here. He knew his kidneys were really marginal. But evidently what he went through in the hospital really damaged his kidneys very severely. And he was going to be on permanent dialysis after that did. And he just, he hated that possibility and prospect. So we pray for the Durr family and pray that they'll be okay. Peter Moore heard that, got a call that his mother had a heart attack. And Peter was headed out today, actually first thing in the morning. It was going to be today, and then he did his classes, and but he talked with his mom and talked with his brothers who are surrounding her. This is up in near Nashville, Tennessee. She lives in Tennessee, and they put a stent in her heart, but it was a widowmaker vein, which is on the back side of the heart. And the doctor really was telling them, I'm going to put this widowmaker in, but chances are she doesn't have maybe a week or so to live. And all of a sudden, she's sitting up. They're going to send her home tomorrow. So the stent worked magnificently, and so Peter's not flying up there. He'll be here Sunday, and we were going to have Ronnie and Ray to do it, and Ray's still probably going to sing Ben is preaching for me because but he's doing his priesthood of all believers talk that he did at the Journey, and it's a beautiful talk, a lot of shared stories and everything else, and that's going to be his talk Sunday. And so Ray's got a song that has just been moving him, and he'll be doing special. So it's going to be a very special service, but we just pray for that. But we give God thanks that right now, Peter's mother, Sarah, is stable and probably going home tomorrow, and the doctor did not expect the stent to work as well as it did. But evidently, it really kind of gave her life again. So we just thank God for that, and pray that that she will continue to be okay. He canceled his plane flight, and he's staying here since she's doing okay. He's got two brothers that are helping take care of her, and so he felt good about that. That's going well for him and for his family. We want to pray really for our kids in Austin and their community, their little gathering of neighbors and everything else, and the tragic loss of a young boy, and so they're kind of bonding together. And we just pray God will see them through that and be okay with that. Our brother-in-law, George Scroll in New Jersey, with a massive stroke, and you haven't heard recently anything about how he's doing. My nephew, Michael Storms, I have not heard anything this week. We did hear a rather good text last week from his mother, and he's still continuing to go through every other week, 48 hours of very intense chemo, and I think was going to have an MRI or a CAT scan or something this next time before he does it to see what kind of anticipation that it is. So, yeah, evaluate what they need to be doing that way. We've been talking, remember Dolores, Val's mom, doing better, but she's got 2 more rounds of chemo. She did good for the first 3, but the 4th one really knocked her for a loop. And that's often the case because it's been weakening her. So she is not, it just doesn't come back that much. So sometimes they have to postpone it if it's, because it's, like I say, it's a very severe thing for the body to experience. So, but we will pray for her and that you can leave her by herself for 2 days or 3 days and she'll be okay. Val is joining me and and Rochelle on our Women's Walk to Emmaus. It begins tomorrow, and looking forward to it. I'm the only thing with testosterone that's going to be on that campus. I'm really not handling it terribly well. Normally I get 1 or 2 male clergy, but I couldn't find them, so I got 4 female clergy that joins me. But really neat pastors and associates, and it's just going to be a neat experience. I'm looking forward to it. But we do covet your prayers for that. Wally Moore had surgery this week. Did it go well? Good. Is he back home? It was just a arthroscopic, so yeah, okay. Just a suspension, typical kind of thing. And Pat? He's still having a lot of problems. Yeah. Of course. It's what God gives wives, husbands for. To remind them that they're not out of the woods yet. That's right. Be grateful. 5:30 Monday morning, I take my wife in for back surgery, and 5:30 a.m. Yes, not in the afternoon, and just pray, that's going to be. It's a rather simple procedure, but anytime they're cutting you open and messing with nerves and everything else, you really just pray that the physician's hand will be protected by God's Spirit and His healing wisdom. So we'll be praying for that. Supposedly, she walks out without pain, and she's teaching 6 hours the very next day, 4 hours the next day, Zoom. But supposedly she's going to be, the good thing is that the doctor promises she's going to be 6 inches higher, taller whenever he's done. But, I won't be taller. Been shrinking because this back has not been there to support me. So, yeah, we very much pray for that. That's, oh my goodness. For Beth, and Ben is having to work at the university. They've got an event going on tonight. It won't be done until 8. But I know that he's still concerned about his mom and grandmother. But Beth, we just pray that she continues to do well. I guess she made it to the Greek festival Sunday afternoon. Did they go? Okay. Now, Ben was trying every way in the world to get out of that, but I don't think that was going to work. The food was good. He said food was, yeah, he went then. Yeah, that's worth going for, to be able to do that. We have others who we're praying for, Sandra Pratt and Francis Quinn and Vita Bracco, friends of ours and of Judy's that are dealing with cancer. And Jim Parker, who's our church member, but has been in the hospital, but I hope to call him before I start the walk this weekend, but he's home and doing that. Elizabeth Roman and Michael Romans, brother and sister. Elizabeth married a Roman, R-O-M-A-N, and her maiden name was Romans, R-O-M-A-N-S, and just put an English pronunciation versus a Spanish pronunciation, but spells the same except without that terminal S on the end of the name. But they're dealing with cancer. It's just really a sad sort of thing. We just want to be very mindful of that. They did. Their mother died with cancer, and now they both got it in spades. It's a genetic thing, evidently. So it's just sad. It really is. We still want to pray for Craig Anderson. He's our beloved presence from prison and from the journey, and he's going to bury his favorite aunt on the 18th, which is a week from this coming Friday. this Friday's the 11th, and so it's the 18th. It'll be the following Friday up in Houston, and we've been praying for him and just praying God will be there. Irma Tamayo's daughter had, they were doing a lumpectomy just to see, or maybe just a biopsy to see what was happening, and she was concerned about that. Ireland Murphy was in a wreck, and we were praying for her. She seems to be doing well. Linda Anderson got back today. Leonard texted us and said that she went through everything just fine. They'll get the results back from all of the biopsy and everything next week. But she's back gallivanting. They're bringing a fruit tray next Tuesday for the Durr family. So we just...
Leonard will be teaching Sunday.
Leonard teaching Sunday in Gwen's behalf. Gwen and Steve are in San Antonio with their son, attending, I think, a concert or something, and Gwen won't get back. She's going to get back in time to get you home. She promised me, okay? If not, we will get you home. You're not going to be stuck out there. You may want to be stuck out there, but you ain't going to be. We're not going to let you get away with that. We also continue to pray for the McMahon family. Vicky's brother is being buried. He's been cremated, but Vicky's going to get a portion of the ashes along with the adopted daughter. And that's happening, the celebration, the memorial services on the 12th, which is this coming Saturday. Okay, all right. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. 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 This is one we've been talking about. That was another. Oh, he died. There was one who died. Yes, this is another one of y'all's friends from. Yeah, this is another friend from the senior center at Garden Center. So. Oh my goodness. Yeah, and just welcomed everybody there. Yeah, kind of like Kurt does for us. Yes, darling. Joanne King. She wanted to be here tonight, but she went to the dermatologist today, and he scraped on her good to help healing happen. So she's just hurting like crazy, almost like a setback. But hopefully she'll bounce back. And so she's driving some, not today, but she's starting to drive a little bit, which is dangerous. But that's just typical. She didn't want to be house locked, so she's doing that. Any other needs that cross your mind, Pat?
My granddaughter in Dallas, her husband lost his grandfather last year.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Unexpected kind of, or he lives up in years, but okay. Okay. That's sweet. That's a connected family. We just need to be mindful of that. Really, really do. It's one of those special things. Mike, praying for you still. Going to see the back doctor Monday. And either shoot him or give him a stick in the back, so, do something to get rid of that pain, help with that, or at least maybe identify some kind of protocol, some way of addressing this that's going to have some hope to it. Got the knees, but now we got to get the back done.
Well, that's probably every angle you can and every machine you can.
Can't find a thing, can they?
Oh, yeah, he's got L3 and L4.
Bulging and... Okay.
Spurs.
The spurs are, yeah. Arthritis spurs and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
That's why it's short.
That's it. Well, that's Judy. She's gonna be taller than you after her surgery Monday. So,
You be taller than me?
yeah, she's counting on it. Boy, you talk about fantasy happening. Praying for you, Mike. Yeah, he might be taller than me. She's already the controlling, dominant person, but it'll make it physically a little bit more easy for me to swallow. So, if she can just be taller than me, then I'll know my place. So we'll be okay with that. Let's have a prayer, and then let's do our Bible study tonight. God, thank you so much for heart and for minds and for fellowship big enough to include the pain and the hurt and the fears and the trauma and the difficulties of loved ones and acquaintances and individuals that are part of our extended family. God, thank you that we get to be a part of healing that comes, whether it is nurturing the Durr family into health again, or whether it is being with people in thought and prayers as we lift them before you, knowing that you are the one that is already addressing those situations and circumstances. God, we offer all of these to you with the confidence of children that have never been let down, that always finds your presence, what we need most for it to be at times in our lives when we have been desperately needed healing or needed comfort. God, we thank you for including us in your designs of healing and attachment to a world that you love and have given yourself for. It is in the name of the living Christ that I pray for these that we have mentioned here tonight. Amen. Okay, we are still in Genesis, just barely. Bill was trying to rush me up a couple of chapters, but it ain't happening. I am going to not miss a verse all the way through. So we are right now in chapter 41 of the book of Genesis. One of the things that I have introduced you to as we've studied the book of Genesis is our ideas that really. Vicki, is that your phone that I'm hearing?
No, it's his oxygen machine.
That's his oxygen machine. Okay. All right. I will ignore it. I just, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I hope that's not, need to answer that. Don't answer it, Mike. Okay. Just leave it alone and breathe deeply. Okay. But I've introduced you to some concepts that are very much a part of scholastic examination of Scripture. I keep on talking about the southern story and the northern story. I have briefly mentioned to you that as scholars have torn apart the Old Testament, particularly the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, they began to immediately observe. I mean, now these are guys that really can almost read Hebrew like you read the comic strips. They are people that are just incredibly embedded in that ancient language. They and what they began to realize as they studied it is that there is patently obvious, very distinct voices whose vocabulary, whose sentence structure, whose utilization about the name of God, whose way of talking about how God relates to humanity and to the people of Israel is very distinct and very congruent within that own particular storyline, and they began to identify that as the Yahwist tradition, the J tradition, or the Judah tradition, which is the southern tradition, and the Ephraimitic or the Elohist tradition. Elohim is the generic term in Hebrew for gods. Elohim is really plural, but in the context of the written Hebrew, when Elohim is used of God himself, it is a singular translation, which is appropriate. Primitive ancient language was not gifted with real refined adjustments and hints or techniques that could distinguish. For example, in Hebrew language, one of the most interesting things to me, because it still affects us when we sing or when we hear Christmas stories or listen to the Andy Griffith show, that the Hebrew language does not have like superlative verbs. It does not have, good, better, and best. It doesn't have that capacity. It's just got one word. And so when the Jews wanted to express the ultimate of that, they said the word 3 times. Holy, holy, holy Lord are you. And all they're trying to say is something we can say in English. We need to loan it to them. Holiest are you. Holier than everybody are you. But they didn't have that finessing way of in their language to be able to do that. So they utilize some things like that we have discovered and explored. Basically, what they do is they compare texts that use the same word, and they'll try to understand and maybe flesh it out a little bit differently. Plus, there are some cognate languages, some languages that are sort of kissing cousins to Hebrew, the Akkadian, Ugaritic, the Canaanite language, Aramaic. All of those languages are kind of like what Latin and French and German are to English. They're words that we have borrowed, particularly from the Latin and the French. Not so much the German, but English language has got some real striking cousins. Again, one of my favorite passages of Scripture from the French is that famous beatitude of Jesus where he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Well, in the French, the language for meek is debonair. Blessed are the debonair, for they shall inherit the earth. And that really translates that word in the Greek better than our word meek. You hear the word meek and you think about Casper milquetoast, spineless, no guts or energy. Whereas that word in the Greek describes the kind of horse that was raised as a colt, that was fiery and would bite you, but would run like the wind and loved you on his back, and but never lost his dignity, never lost his fire. Kind of like Kentucky thoroughbreds. They're born and loved into adulthood by kids and by loving and petting, as over against, comparatively, the broken horse that is caught in the wild and is ridden until he breaks down. And he'll still plow for you, he'll still ride for you, but he's lost his spirit. His spirit has been crushed. When Jesus says, blessed are the meek, he is using a word that comes from the palatial estate of the kind of horse that was lovingly brought into submission to the bridle, but never broken of spirit. They are powerful. They submit willingly to the master, but boy, they have muscle and sinew and fire and beauty and go-gettedness. Blessed are the debonair, for they shall inherit the earth. And so when we deal with ancient languages, we are sort of confined to limitations of those languages, but we also have other languages that are kissing cousins, maybe that were originally part of the Hebrew language. It's kind of like going over into Louisiana and hearing some Cajun dialect, or just going to North Texas around cattle barns, and you'll hear a form of English language that you can barely understand. A bunch of drawl and tobacco spitting and vocabulary. In Kentucky, I was just delighted with the kinds of expressions that were unique to Kentucky. One of them that I'll never forget, that I never could quite understand, but they would use the phrase "right smart," and I cannot tell you what it meant, except it was kind of a way of enhancing the statement that they had just made, or the observation that they had just made. But they would use that word "right smart," and I couldn't use it because it's not in my vocabulary. So as the scholars were reading the Old Testament, the first 5 books, they recognized that there were voices, very distinct, isolated, not contaminated with each other, that had identifiable markers, had identifiable syntax or vocabulary. And I pointed that out to you, that the Yankee tradition never calls God by his personal intimate name, Yahweh, Jehovah. That's the Southern tradition. There is also in the Pentateuch what is recognized as the priestly tradition, and it's really designated by the letter P, the priestly tradition. The priestly tradition is that section of the Pentateuch that we'll skip over when we get to it, but it is all of the begets that goes on for chapter and chapter and chapter. The priests were the ones who were sort of assigned to keep the genealogy intact. They were the ones who were assigned the task to make sure that families knew who their ancestors were, and they would memorize that, and they would somehow incorporate it down and maintain it for the following legacy and the progeny that would follow on to that. Because again, in Jewish theology, there was no afterlife. When you died, you were dead, and that the only thing that gave you value was to be remembered. And even to this day, if you were to go to the temple over on Saratoga, and you go in their worship environment, you'll see all around the walls, about chest high, little round lights with a little toggle switch beneath them. And if you get up close enough to it, you'll see a name on a plaque that is part of that little light. And those are people that have been part of that congregation that have died, and on their birthday, they flip on the switch and they remember them so that they have life. They are remembered. Now, there is a contingency, an element of Judaism, not so much alive today, but was very much present in Jesus' day, that did believe in resurrection, that believed that God was going to resurrect us, that He was going to keep us alive for fellowship. That was the Pharisees, but the Pharisees died out whenever the temple was destroyed, and they pretty much just disappeared. The Sadducees remained on because they were accommodating to any culture that they found themselves in. But by and large, Jewish culture doesn't have a real formal understanding of what happens in death, except that they enter the world of the shadow. You become like a shadow on the wall. You have no capacity to speak. You can't move anything. You just are reflective of a once remembered existence. And that is about as nice as it gets for the Jews. So in tonight's story, the story begins, and most scholars say that this story, the very first verse, is a P. This is from the priestly source, because all it does is identify the age of Joseph. And so we pick it up in verse 46 of the 41st chapter of Genesis. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Entered into the service really translates Hebrew expression that simply he stood before the Pharaoh. That was the word, the expression that they had that would indicate that I'm at your beck and call. I'm ready for you to give me an assignment. It's like being called to the principal's office or being called into the boss. And you're going to go in there to receive instructions about what you're going to do today. Still in companies. And Bill, I assume that there were times in your business life where you had crews underneath you, and the first thing you do in the morning is gather them all together and identify what the projects were and sort of assign them out so they would go do it. But they would stand before you, and that was the expression to indicate that Joseph was now in the service of the Pharaoh. He was going to be given a particular assignment. He was 30 years of age, and from that we recognize that he probably had been incarcerated in the dungeon for approximately 12 to 13 years. Back in chapter 37, the early part of the chapter, there's an indication about how old he was as a young boy when he sold into slavery in Egypt. And here he is, 30 years of age, some 12, 13 years later, that he now, because of his capacity to interpret dreams, is going to have a very special assignment assigned to him by the Pharaoh, the head, the king, the president of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. One of the commentaries that I was reading observes, after you've been in jail for 12 or 14 years and you get out and you're free, you kind of got the wanderlust about you. You're going to go wandering around. You're going to really feel what it's like to flap your wings and to get out of that place. It's kind of like teenagers that leave home and think that the world belongs to them now. They go off scandaling and, go sailing, go cruising, go driving across country, and not a care in the world, and they're now free from their prison at home with mom and dad. That would seem to be Joseph's motivation. He could have been going out there to kind of oversee the assignment and the organization of how he was going to prepare for the 7 lean years. But he's already got 5 cohorts or contractors under him that he seems to have assigned to different sections of the land of Egypt to oversee and to make sure the building of the not dungeons, but the silos, the granaries were going to be built in those places. So he goes wandering out throughout all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth abundantly. And he gathered up all of the food of the 7 years when there was bunches of food in the land of Egypt, and stored up food in the cities. He stored up in every city the food from the fields that surrounded that city. Now, that's when you say stored up. No, they ate. They saved grain for planting next year's crops. It wasn't 100% sticking and going through starvation, trying to get ready for the 7 lean years. But it was a massive setting aside. Is kind of like what we in America do when we have that petroleum reserve. The government very wisely, back when we had our first oil crisis, decided that it was going to stockpile lots of petroleum, so that if the Arabian petroleum producers shut it down or tried to politically damage us, we had enough stored up so that we could maybe survive for 3 to 6 months without their help until we tapped into maybe some other resource. This is what he's doing. He's got grain reserves that he has been stockpiling in all the cities around Egypt, knowing that in his dream interpretation, at the end of 7 years, it's going to turn lean. And so, sure enough, verse 40, verse 49, and Joseph stored up grain in the great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. In other words, he really did a bang-up job. There was plenty. And yet, having never been through 7 years without, you don't know how much it's going to take. And so, I don't know that he overdid it. When I was reading this, my first image that I had in my mind was my wife fixing a supper for some guests. She never underprepares. In fact, she fixed me ribs yesterday that could have fed an army. And she confessed it. Well, they were all frozen together. I just went ahead and fixed them all. I mean, it was a whole batch of ribs. I mean, I didn't even get through a tenth of it. Yeah, I'm going to be gone all week, and she's going to be eating ribs for breakfast and lunch. And yeah, she'll pick it. You think I'm through eating them. You're crazy. Anyway, he didn't know for sure how much, but he really did a good job of preparing for that. And then verse 50, before the year of famine came, Joseph had, and remember he said 7 years, so 7 years is time to have 2 boys. God gave him 2 sons, whom Asenath, who was named after an Egyptian god or goddess, the sun god really, On, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, bore to him. Again, as I shared with you last week, this priest, tried to think of something in our own governmental hierarchy that would befit them. I mean, this is a cabinet level position. Yes, he was a religious leader, but in ancient times, religion and politics were inseparable. In fact, in the early days of the life of Israel and Palestine, the king was also the head of its religion. It wasn't until later that they separated and the priestly caste came there, but still, the king was given incredible religious authority, very much like somewhat the King of England or the Queen of England is still head of the church, as well as the head of the government. Potipharah was a very consequential person, maybe second or third in order of ascendancy and of priority in the hierarchy of the Egyptian government. And that was the one that Pharaoh negotiated for Joseph to marry, the daughter of one of the big shots in all of Egypt. Now, I've shared with you before that we know that the Bible as we have it in our laps wasn't put down in this kind of form until during the exile, the great captivity of when Babylon came into Jerusalem and hauled off all the able-bodied men and women and took them back over to serve them in Babylon, common day Iraq, and along the Tigris-Euphrates River. And it was there in Babylon within 50 years when Persia, which was further east, came in, and the king of Babylon just said, I don't want to fight. I'm going down to my seacoast villa. You could hear the keys to the city. Go in and take over. I'm sick and tired of dealing with these people. And he retired, and Persia became the king of Babylon, and plus the Persian Empire. And Persia, very close to China, but Persia had developed writing instruments. I didn't turn this on so be able to hear me. I don't have to yell so loud. I feel like I'm yelling back there. the Persians had developed some incredibly scientific skills that the Jews adopted, and one of them was the capacity to record literature on very manageable surfaces. Before then, by and large, and ancient civilizations recorded their deeds and their family trees on little clay tablets, and they used a pointed stick, and they would imprint the letters, or the kind of like the Indian drawings, into these clay tablets, and then they would set them out and dry them, and they would harden, and they would stack them in their libraries, just stack them up like dominoes, just crammed them in there. And when they got into Persia, all of a sudden Persia introduced, using all kinds of dyes and sheepskin, and they had even built the capacity to weave reeds together and make a kind of parchment. Not parchment as the sheepskin, to make I just went blank. Papyri, which is a writing stuff. In fact, the oldest piece of New Testament writing, and it may be part of the original Gospel of John, is about 3 or 4 verses that they found on papyri. They didn't have any erasures, and what they would do is that they would gently take a rock and they would scrape off the surface of the papyri. It would get kind of gray and dull, but they would use it several times to record or to write something else. And it was on one of these pieces of papyri that there had been a love letter written, and they began to scrape it off, and underneath it they found 2 or 3 verses in the 14th chapter of the Gospel of John that has to date from the 1st century. It may have been one of the original autographs. We don't know. But the Jews learned and co-opted the skill of writing and being able to record their oral traditions in a document form. And so when they did this, they memorized the laws of God. And when Ezra brings a group of Jews back from Persia or from Babylon to Jerusalem to start rebuilding the city, because Cyrus, the king of Persia, didn't want to use any of his army to keep them sort of under wraps and under guard. He said, "I'll just tax you. You go back and raise crops and be successful. And I'm just going to tax you. I want your money. I don't need your muscle power. My kingdom's big enough to do that." And when Ezra came back, first thing he did is he looked around the city of Jerusalem. There had been maybe 400 or 500 people there, their families. And he went around, and every Jewish man that had married a Babylonian woman, he told them, he says, you pack her a sack lunch of peanut butter and jelly and her kids, and tomorrow morning you put them on the outside of the gates and you send them back to Babylon. However they want to get there, send them out. Get them out of here. We want holy people here. We want to be a pure generation, pure native people. And so when these people who were that uppity or that self-absorbed or that self-righteous would read this story, this is a difficult thing for them to do, but you just can't change the story to satisfy the fact that my great-grandfather married an old Egyptian and a pagan woman, but there's no way for them to escape it. And so he's talking about how Joseph, marrying Asenath, had 2 boys. Manasseh, which basically means I've got something else to think about instead of my past. It means making me forget. And it's not that he forgot his past. It's not that he forgot being enslaved. He did not forget that his brothers sold him into slavery. It's not forget that he's got a daddy that he hadn't seen for decades. He hadn't forgotten that, but what happens is with Manasseh, and every grandparent in this room knows this, that it's one thing to have your own children, but when your children's children come, you forget how problematic it was to raise children. I know that one of the truisms or aphorisms of grandparents is if I could have just had my grandkids first, parenting would have been so much easier, so much easier. And so what Joseph is expressing here is that I've got something filling my day and filling my awareness that causes me not to dwell or to be saddened by my upbringing or my loss or what I've already been through. And then he had another boy by the name of Ephraim, which Ephraim means, boy, am I having a good time now. That's a loose translation of Ephraim, meaning that to be fruitful. And he's not talking about, fruitful in the number of kids he has. It's really referring to the fact that, I spent 12, 14 years in a dungeon. I'm a Jewish boy. I'm a low-class man on the totem pole in this whole culture, and look where I am now. I'm rich. I've got plenty to eat. I've got, man, Ephraim is my reminder that I am blessed, that I have arrived, that I am very much aware that I am in a very privileged position. And so those are his two boys' names, and that's classic of the way that ancient peoples used to name their children. Sometimes they named them for previous ancestors, but oftentimes they named them for things that surrounded their birth. Jacob the supplanter, because when he was born, he was holding on to Esau's heel, and that's where he got his name. I'm not sure what I would have been named. I'm just really glad that we'd stopped doing that, because when I was a child, I'm sure that I would have had a name that... I know my oldest brother, for those of you who don't know architecture or commercial drawings of homes or whatever else, there is a designation in blueprints that has the simple letters WC. My name is William Claude. My brother, who was familiar with WC, would call me WC. WC in a blueprint is a water closet. It's the bathroom. Okay? So I figured that out as I grew up, that my brother kind of wanted to remind me where I really came from. So, I accept that. I do enjoy, and when I'm on a journey or a walk or whatever, we get little styrofoam cups, and we really try to be environmentally sensitive, and so we try to hang on to our styrofoam cups and use it through the weekend. And we always take a pen and label or put our name on it. And when I put my name on my cup, it is B.S. So that everybody knows who BS is. And there are people who, just, don't do that, That's my initials. What else am I going to do with that initial? You know who it is. Nobody's going to touch it now. Anyway, that's Ephraim and Manasseh. We do know that that when they return, the whole clan of Israel returns through the Exodus under the leadership of Moses and Aaron, that Manasseh and Ephraim occupy the northernmost section of the land of Palestine. They are also the two tribes that had the greatest difficulty staying away from pagan idolatry. So there was something in their DNA that they got from their mother that simply said, if religion looks good, no matter where it showed up from, we can buy into this. We can utilize this. And then verse 53, very quickly, because I know what time it is. The 7 years of plenty that prevailed in the land of Egypt came to an end. And then the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had predicted. There was not only famine in Egypt, there was famine in all the lands around Egypt. But in all the land of Egypt, there was bread. They kept on eating. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, you go to Joseph. What he says for you to do, do it. Had one of my commentaries that observed that that's exactly what Mary said to the disciples when she brought attention to him at the marriage of Cana, that they were running out of wine. And Jesus rebukes her and says, that's none of my business, woman. And then she walks away and she turns to the disciples and says, if he tells you to do something, go ahead and do it. She kind of knew his character, I think, more than anything else. Well, this is sort of that pedigree that Joseph had to carry with him. What we do know is that when things get a little bit tight, there are some people who start complaining the first. It is one of the great delights that I have managing a major kind of golf event every Monday and Thursday at the Oso. I've got 57 men that I notify, and they come, and we organize into teams and this sort of thing. And I will tell you that there are about 4 or 5 of those men that just make everybody out there just angry as they can be. They don't bother me because they're going to complain. You know, they'll come up and, how did you make this team? Why, you just did this on purpose. I said, I don't make up the teams. The sheet does. We got your handicap. The sheet does it. You know, but you guys are paying me the big bucks. Go ahead and yell at me. It's okay. We've got some people that their first order of business is to complain. It's just, I just love it. I can see them coming. And I razz them about it or anything else. But it's, you know, there were people typically when they began to have a little bit of want around their house, they begin to complain, and they go and complain to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, it's not my business. You go tell Joseph. I put him in charge of that. So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph began to open all the storehouses, the granaries, and he began to sell out of those granaries to his citizens, the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Not only that, but Joseph had done such a good job. The last verse of chapter 41 is that all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. And next week, we're going to see that famine reached north of Egypt into the land of Palestine. And Jacob, Joseph's daddy, and Joseph's brothers are starving. And they get word by Facebook that there is plenty of grain down in Egypt. And so they're going to organize a search party like the Wagoneers used to do, to go out and see if they can find them some buffalo. And that's going to be the story that we're going to get into next week. But the interesting thing, I've already shared with you that the stunning realization that the people of Jews who were the editors and who took all the oral traditions and began to codify them in this written document that we now treasure as the Old Testament, it must have galled them to talk about their ancestors that did not obey the law of God. Of course, they didn't think about the fact that, well, Moses hadn't come up yet, and Joseph didn't know that was against the law to marry an outsider and to, you know, to make. But really, the story of Israel is the story of a lot of cross-pollination of some reprobates. You got Ruth the Moabitess. You've got Rahab the harlot that's part of the lineage of Jesus. You've got Asenath, the wife of Joseph. You've got it was Jacob who married Rachel. That's a half brother, but Isaac married somebody that was not part of the family clan, and so, you know, all these contaminations of people that were not God people. And the good thing is that God was smarter than they were to know that the real purity is not something that you gain because you marry the right person. The real sanctity that happens is when God touches your life and when God calls you to follow Him and you obey. That's where the real holiness breaks out. And it's one of the things we're having to learn in our culture. You know, the prejudice of my grandmother and my family and watching friends of mine and classmates of mine marry other races. I mean, it was perfectly natural for me. I never thought a thing about it, but boy, my parents did. You know, and they were hyper vigilant that we only dated our kind. Now, I didn't experience that direct command, but I really think down inside of me, I understood that that was the law of the Robinson clan, and which is my mother's side of the family, and yet God is continually demonstrating for us that His great gifts that come to us are only because of what Jesus does, not because of what we do externally to protect or to make ourselves a pure people or the right kind of people or our kind of people. It is Jesus that justifies. It's Jesus that redeems. It's Jesus that makes us the children of God, what He wants each of us to be. But we're having to still learn that. And we ain't there yet. We're not there yet. We are not there yet. We got a long ways to go. But the neat thing, God hadn't given up on us. That's the best thing I love. He hasn't given up on us. And that is very, very precious to me. Okay, I'll say a prayer and get rid of you and tell you right now I'm going to miss you Sunday, so help me. If you start fighting in here, you're not going to hear the end of it when I get back. I'm going to just take you on one at a time. And you first, Mike, so y'all behave yourself Sunday when I'm not here. Oh, yeah, I bet you will. You sleep all the way through my sermon. You won't be ready for squat, so... Let me dismiss you. Oh, God, go with my family. Bless them richly this week and bring them back to celebrate your presence and to hear your word shared from one of our own family members. God, thank you so much that we have a place not only to belong, but a place to share with others who need a place to belong. Bless richly and prepare this community of faith for their time together at worship as I ask your blessings upon our walk and the new family and the new community that will be formed this weekend. I ask all of this in the name of our brother and Redeemer, Jesus. Amen. Okay, kids, get out of here. Go have fun. Go have fun.